Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for July 29th, 2022. I'll be reporting today on the continued drift in two completely opposite directions of world policies. On the one hand, toward a new strategic and financial architecture, which is what the Schiller Institute has been promoting, and on the other side, a move toward increasing top-down control by the City of London and Wall Street banks in a world dominated by war, austerity, and scarcity. Let's begin with what the German government announced yesterday. The Green Minister of Economics, Robert Habeck, put out a statement saying the government will impose a gas levy on households to protect gas suppliers from bankruptcy. This is going to be in addition to what already will be very much higher gas prices. Habeck said in announcing this, this imposes a heavy burden on households. He said it is not a good step, but a necessary one. What he's proposing is, actually imposing, not proposing, this is already policy now, an increase in costs of up to 2,000 euros from October to March per household for family of four to cover the costs of gas. That's $2,000 per household this winter, on top of rising food prices and inflation. We're seeing new regulations in German cities. In Hanover, they announced there will be no hot water in public buildings, and there are similar moves in other cities. We have the new report on the European Union farm policy, which projects that there will be a reduction of agricultural production by 10 to 30% as a result of the green agriculture policy. Beef prices are projected to be rising by 24%, pork prices up 43%. Now, the European Union, the so-called center of democracy, is imposing self-censorship. They've classified a report they produced by the Joint Research Center of the EU because of the negative findings of what the results will be of European Union policy. Now, how long will citizens of nations in Europe tolerate this? Is this going to be the new normal? Price hikes that make necessities unaffordable? Governments have fallen. There are demonstrations gathering strength in virtually every country. There's a move toward a mass strike or a general strike in the United Kingdom. Well, while this is occurring, the EU is also recognizing the lack of support for their policies for the rest of the world. There's a new European Union report that said the EU is losing Africa. Now, as they put out this report, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has just completed a tour of several African countries. He was in Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He, in addition to meetings with leaders in those countries, he briefed a meeting of representatives of the 55 nations of the African Union. And then he also gave a briefing to the representatives of the 22-nation Arab League. And in these briefings, he reported on what was behind the decision on February 24th to launch the special military operations in Ukraine. And then he reported on what Russia is doing to ease the food crisis, to make sure that oil and gas is available to countries. I gave a detailed report on both what led to the situation, the war in Ukraine, as well as the subsequent effects of the sanctions policy to create hardship for nations of the global South. This obviously struck a nerve with the thin-skinned Secretary of State of the United States, Blinken, who used a press briefing yesterday to attack Lavrov's tour as a, quote, desperate game of defense, unquote. Well, Blinken is the leading spokesman for the so-called rules-based order, which is the dictatorship of the City of London and Wall Street over the world. And that is what's not popular. And his statement yesterday actually was the indication of the desperation of the establishment in the transatlantic region. There's also a Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting that's convening in Tashkent, where there'll be discussion of major infrastructure projects, and there will be a proposal put forward for a single currency for SCO trade operations. Now, let's look at a couple of things happening in Ukraine. This has occurred over the last week, the first one, but President Zelensky is continuing to purge officials of the Ukrainian intelligence community. Is he consolidating his power, or is he fearful that there might be a coup based on domestic opposition to the war? This is part of the pattern of anti-democratic actions that the Zelensky government has undertaken, including censorship, including shutting down opposition press and opposition parties. Secondly, as we've already reported, there was released on July 14th by the Center for Countering Disinformation of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. That is an official government agency. They put out a list of 78 people they accused of being purveyors of Russian propaganda. 30 people on that list have participated at Schiller Institute conferences. I'm on that list, as is Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Jason Ross. Others on the list include prominent people such as Glenn Greenwald, Ray McGovern, and Tulsi Gabbard. Now, what is it that they're afraid of? And why is it that when the West reports on this, they don't mention that nearly half of those identified are participants in Schiller Institute conferences? Well, there's a reason for it. That is because we're presenting the truth behind what's going on in Ukraine. That it has nothing to do with a Russian attack on a democratic, freedom-loving people. It's that Ukraine is being used as a battering ram against Russia to put a stop to the potential for an emergence of an integration of European nations with Eurasian nations. That is, that the move from a unipolar world of dictatorship of the bankers to a series of agreements, multilateral, bilateral agreements for cooperation in trade and economic development, which is being led by Russia and China, centered around the Belt and Road Initiative. That the effort to stop this was in the long-term goal of the post-Cold War era, going back to 1990, the betrayal of promises to Russia, the expansion of NATO eastward. Now, eastward expansion of NATO includes bringing in, the attempt to bring in nations of the South Pacific and the Indo-Pacific region into a global NATO. Now, that's the truth. It's a fight between the new financial and strategic architecture that's been associated globally with the LaRouche movement, which is why 30 of the 78 people attacked and named are associated with us, because they want to stop that. And instead, they want to continue the unipolar world of the so-called rules-based order. Helga Zepp-LaRouche drafted a response to this, and it will be linked in the description box below for you to read and circulate. And it shows that the Ukrainian government and Zelensky are nothing but puppets of this Anglo-American new empire. Now, meanwhile, we have a new report out from the U.S. government, which projects GDP contraction in the U.S. by 0.9% for the entire year. Finally, yesterday, there was a 2-hour conversation between President Xi of China and Biden of the United States. I don't think we're going to get the full flavor of that from the U.S. release, but the Chinese basically said that Xi delivered a message that you're playing with fire with the Taiwan situation, especially if you send Nancy Pelosi over there as a provocation against China. The increase of tension over Taiwan at the point at which the Ukraine war is going badly for the West is a dangerous direction. And we can see further the intent in the Henry Jackson Society, which is a war hawk institute in London of neoconservatives. They just put out a new report on global Britain's strategy for defending the empire. The title of it tells you everything you need to know. securing the Strait, engaging Taiwan in the United Kingdom's Indo-Pacific tilt. This is global Britain. This is what's behind these developments. That's why they're trying to make sure that what we're saying, what the Schiller Institute is saying and doing, is not reported, is kept out of the news, is treated as a conspiracy on behalf of Russian President Putin, when in fact, if you look at the people on the list, you'll see many independent people who are expressing their own opinion. Well, that's not acceptable in Tony Blinken's rules-based order. That's not acceptable for the promoters of the Green New Deal and the destruction of physical economy who are out to reduce the world's population. So join our fight for this new strategic and financial architecture. Circulate our videos. Circulate the Zepp-LaRouche statement on what Ukraine is trying to do. And make sure that your friends do not wallow in the pessimism. I'm in the US now, and I see the extent to which people are responding almost in the same way as the people of Germany are, shrugging their shoulders, saying there's nothing we can do, Biden's terrible, the Republicans have no alternative. Well, be the alternative. Join us and make sure that people have an option besides submitting to this new world order. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week.